Hi, I'm Malcolm Stern, and in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson from Online Events, we're creating a series of podcasts called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. My book of the same name was conceived and inspired by the suicide of my daughter Melissa and the journey that took me on and the internal resources that I found. All of my guests will have a story to tell around overcoming and ultimately thriving through adversity. Special thanks to the band Stairway, Jim McCarty and Louis Chinamo, for the use of theme music from their album Medicine Dance, and my engineer Owen Santiago. I hope you enjoy this series, and thanks for listening. Welcome to my podcast, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, done in conjunction with my good friends John and Sandra Wilson at Online Events. And this is a range of podcasts which are exploring how adversity shapes us as human beings, how the overcoming of adversity is often the thing that takes us to the next level of who we are and how we function. And my guest today is Fiona Robertson. And Fiona, you've written a book called The Dark Night of the Soul, and that's sort of what drew me to exploring with you, because that's very much in alignment with the theme of this podcast. And in order to have written a book called The Dark Night of the Soul, presumably you have travelled through the dark night of the soul yourself. So perhaps we can start there and have you share with us a bit.
Yeah. Thank you, Malcolm. Yes, absolutely. So I wrote the book in 2018, 7 years out of 7 years past. I mean, I use the word emergence loosely, and maybe we can dig into that a bit more later. But in 2011, I felt like my life was going really well. I'd set up and been co-directing a health project for several years, and that had recently won a national NHS award. I was in a new relationship. I'd got really fit. There were a number of things that I felt like, okay, this is finally into my 40s. I'm now the person that I feel like I should be. And within a number of months from thinking that, that all started to fall apart pretty catastrophically. At the time, I described the early part of that as a crash. It felt like I was crashing. It felt like I'd hit the wall at 100 miles an hour, and everything within me, around me, started to unravel very quickly.
It's interesting because we often feel like we've arrived somewhere, and of course we never arrive anywhere. Life will flow on and take us in all sorts of different directions. But it sounds like it was a major crash for you, that actually you were flowing very easily and then bang. And so what triggered the crash? What did the crash actually look like?
Well, I think in reality, things weren't flowing really easily. I mean, that's how it might have looked on the surface, but actually that wasn't really the case. I think it's quite difficult to say what triggered it. I mean, I think there are various strands in that, some of which were to do with hormones, both perimenopausal hormones and an oncoming thyroid condition. Some of it was, I think, around being in a fairly new relationship, which in retrospect very neatly replayed certain childhood dynamics.
As they do, yes.
And I think there's something more than that in this. I mean, I had a sense, even at the time, that there was something very faint somewhere in the background calling me. And I was too busy, I was too on it. I didn't have the capacity at that point to really consciously stop, and until I was stopped. So I think it was coming in from different places.
And how did that play out? So you went from being feeling pretty all right with your life to suddenly things starting to fall apart. What did the falling apart actually look like in its different stages?
So at the beginning, there was pretty much a complete incapacity came upon me. I mean, I'd felt like I'd been really capable, albeit there were a number of sort of cracks in the edifice. And and maybe one of the metaphors that came up is most useful in this. I had this really strong sense that the dam had burst. And I think that sort of encapsulate the various elements of this, that not only was the structure breaking, but the everything that had been held behind the structure was suddenly flooding in. So I ceased to be able to function at work. It became really difficult to do even the basic things in life. And there was an unstoppable flow of emotion, memory, all sorts of basically fragments of the past coming in an incredibly visceral, raw way. So this is happening very much on the on a deep physical level as every other level.
And did you have, I mean, obviously there's a lot of confusion around that from the sound of it as well. And I'm wondering whether you had support. Did you have a therapist? Did you have friends who were able to get you? Did you have some sort of support group that you were part of?
So for me, I mean, it isn't that there wasn't confusion in the mix of everything else, but very fortunately, I came across this phrase, dark night of the soul, very early on. And as soon as I saw that, even though I didn't really know what that meant, there was an instant recognition and resonance with that because I knew that there was something very profound happening, which wasn't solely about my psyche. Um, no, in short, nobody else around me knew what was going on, understood what that terrain is. Um,
So did you wonder if you were going crazy at some point in time as well?
Again, I think all of that was in the mix. I mean, there's so many things coming in: terror, grief, a whole range of emotion. And I think more than anything else, I think there was along with that, there was a deep shame that everything I had previously kind of successfully, and I use that term extremely loosely, held at bay, was now coming to the fore. You know, the mask was coming off, all of that was falling apart.
Yes. Well, Jung's got this saying that everything is synchronicity. And since I first heard that, I'm so aware of it. And it sounds like this phrase, dark night of the soul, popped up into your consciousness in whatever way it did, and actually gave you some sort of an anchor to be able to understand what was happening for you.
Yeah, I mean, because all these years later, what I'm acutely aware of when I'm working with people in this place is that there's something about the recognition and validation of that from outside, somebody else saying, yeah, absolutely, this is what you're in, and there is this terrain of whether we call that existential crisis or the dark night of the soul or spiritual emergency, which is this, and it's a very human, very natural place to be. Actually, it's just that it's not talked about very often. It's not recognized.
Yeah, I've just been reading a book by Francis Weller called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and there's something in that about that we go through. Sorrow is a natural part of our human makeup, and the avoidance of it is only the avoidance of life. And what I'm hearing is that you couldn't avoid.
Completely, this is completely unavoidable, and of course at the beginning there was huge shame in that, because like so many of us, you know, we grow up and we're taught, and you know, this is encouraged often therapeutic and spiritual circles often, that if you just do the right thing, if you just do the right practice or the right meditation or whatever it is, that these things are somehow controllable. And
That's
I
it.
and I love that phrase, the wild
Hmm.
edge, because that's very much where we are in the dark night of the soul. And often, subsequently we become wilder, or more able to be in the wildness through this process, because I think all of the things that we've held at bay are actually natural. The sorrow, the rage, the terror, all, so many things come through that have been treated as taboo in some way, all these things that we're kind of not really supposed to feel.
Mm. Well, we're supposed to be able to control our lives as well. And of course, ultimately, we're not even in control of our own death either. So it's unless we choose to take our life. But there is something about the releasing of control, or the surrendering, I suppose, to what it is that draws us into a much larger reality than we'd known existed for us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it became really clear to me very early on that I had no control over it. And of course that's terrifying at the beginning. And I think, when we talk about surrender, I think we have a tendency to talk about things in absolutes. And so there are slowly there were more moments of surrender, and I came to understand what that actually meant, that it wasn't some sort of capitulation or giving up. It was something much softer, more gentle, kinder than that. And that the fighting and resisting also wasn't wrong. That there was something really valuable in that. So it isn't about saying, I don't think, oh, so the solution is you just surrender. I think there's
Yeah.
something, an understanding that there's something that we start to touch into very gradually in this place, which is so much deeper than anything that we could have imagined.
Yeah, that's very important that the struggle and the fighting that goes with that are part of this process. And so just surrendering and going, oh, well, I'll roll over and play dead is not what you're talking about at all, is it? So, um,
No, not at all. I mean, I think it's quite difficult to convey the flavor of this kind of surrender, because we're so used to the idea of winning and losing, or overcoming or not being able to overcome, although there's the sort of binary of this. And I think the kind of surrender that we're talking about is beyond that. It
yes.
isn't, it doesn't really fit within that binary.
And so would you say it has a spiritual component to it?
Massively. I mean, I think there's no, it's called Dark Night of the Soul because I think it's deeply soul related. And the spiritual component, I think, really comes about in very different ways depending on what our previous experiences has been. I think very often, and certainly for me, it was simultaneously both the falling apart of all of the ideas about spirituality that I had, and a coming into connection, a little bit like we were just saying with the surrendering, a coming into contact with a sense of something, and I hesitate to use words, but sense of deep love or kindness, or something that starts to gradually seep into us
Mm,
as we're willing to, I mean, not even willing, often, as we're just in this place, that there is something of of a of a reconnecting, a reclamation, a coming into contact with something that we've previously been separated from in some way, and yet something that feels deeply known when we come into contact with it.
yes. So it sounds like from what you've been saying so far that your precept is that our lives are guided, and actually it's not so much about surrendering to the guidance, but it's about actually finding our way to, it's almost like fit into the slipstream that we're drawn into. And obviously that's something that you have managed. You must have had some resources, very much when I lost my daughter, which was the inspiration for the show and also the book Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. I realized I had some resources, and without those resources, I would have been adrift. And it took quite a while to land the resources. So I'm wondering about your resources in this journey through the dark night of the soul.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I think at the beginning it feels like they're pretty scant because the resources that we've tended to rely on prior to this are those of what we might call the survival self or the adapted self or whatever words we put to that. And so when it first starts to happen, we're trying to throw all our old kind of coping strategies at it, and they just don't work. So I think there is a period of time where it's inevitable and natural that we feel really resourceless.
Almost
And
abandoned
yet,
by life, isn't it?
sorry, say that again.
Almost abandoned by life.
Absolutely, that sense of there being nothing, everything falling away, being very common. And I think often the little moments of resource that come in aren't necessarily internal. So they might be a moment in nature, or music was really important for me. Just I would find a song or a track that really resonated in the moment and play that endlessly, or just a word might come in. So I think rather than this idea of somehow we had to find resources within us, I mean, I'm not saying they don't exist entirely, but I think so much then came in really unexpected ways and could be really momentary, just a tiny, tiny little glimpse in the darkness, as it were.
Yes, I think it's for me. It's about a mix that some of the resources are internal and can be found by nature, music, literature, or art, all that sort of thing. And but then some of the resources are also external, which are things like creating a sangha, which is very much my practice in my life, which is a community of like-minded others and creating environments where that can happen. So I run, for example, a local therapy group which meets once a fortnight, and people can open up and actually don't feel like they're crazy anymore because they're able to be understood. And we practice deep listening, we practice reflective feedback. And I'm wondering what your external resources look like.
At that time, uh, not a great deal. I mean, I mean, it's interesting hearing you describe all that because those are the kinds of things that I've created subsequently and come upon, in different ways since then. At that time, for the 4 years that I was most intensely in the dark night, I did see a therapist for the latter part of that for a little while. Um, but beyond that, there wasn't a sense of some sort of community or anything of that ilk. And I think it is something that I find really quite common in the dark night, that actually finding something like that is quite hard. Something is a place in which it's possible to be as we are in that moment,
Yes,
because the intensity of it is such that actually a lot of that the intensity is such that it's difficult to hold unless there's connection with somebody who knows what it is to be in that place.
yes. Well, I found that, for example, when I used to work with people who had experienced suicide in their lives, I was much more of a philosopher and much less able to tread the path with them. And it was only after that was the place I went to that I became a very different person to work with. I'm also wondering whether your fledgling relationship survived this because It's almost like the reality changes, and could your partner change along with it? Did they want to change along with it? Did you want them to change along?
No, it didn't survive. It didn't survive past the end of that time. Um, I think there was something about actually coming into that as a last, almost as some sort of last ditch attempt to create in my life what I thought I should have.
Yes.
And actually, subsequently, I realized that I'd probably come into relationship with somebody who would have been my mother's choice of
Ah,
relationship.
interesting. Yes, it was a good girl relationship.
Yes, to some extent, it felt like some kind of arrival in some way, which was actually on a deeper level not the case at all.
Yes, and was there a lot of confusion around that period? Presumably there would have been.
Confusion around the relationship or
Yes,
around the
yes,
dark.
yes.
Um,
Because it might have felt like the relationship was going to be a resource as you entered into difficult realms, and that's what we often feel that our partner will be able to come with us, and then when they can't, it's a shock as well.
yes, I think there was definitely some of that in there. I think looking back, it's difficult to get a sense of exactly how it was at the beginning, but I certainly was holding out, I think, hope when I went into it. And what what was there was a degree of practical support, which was something I'd not actually had before in my
Yes,
life. So I think there was something about that in the timing as well, that I could fall apart in some ways, that there was something in my system that knew, the practicalities in life wouldn't completely fall apart if I did. And of course none of that was conscious, of course. So whilst there was some measure of practical support, any kind of understanding on other levels wasn't the case. And I think there was a period of feeling around that, and then there was clarity.
yes, yes. And what did it look like coming out of or going through the dark night of the soul? What happened for you? Have you arrived somewhere? Are you in a place of potential arrival? What's happening as we look now in the present at this?
So for those 4 years, it looked, as I've described, really that there were various waves of intensity, and I think it does have a kind of arc to it. It's also cyclical within that. So, I described the chapter headings of things like crashing, falling, being in the underworld, transmuting our pain, being with ourselves. So there's a kind of, as I say, a kind of arc, although I use that word very loosely. And emerging out of it for me was very slow, almost imperceptible, just finding things happening. It wasn't as I imagined it at the beginning. I think we often have this notion like we'll do X and then we'll feel better and then we'll go and do Y. And I
Yes,
don't think that's how it happens at all. I think that after a certain, I don't know what it is, and I can't lay claim to sort of having done anything that took me out of that. But I think there was something about just finding myself starting to do little things. The day came when I left that relationship and moved house. The day came when that necessitated going and getting a job. So there was this very slow movement. And for me, I don't think this is about overcoming or arrival. I think there's something much more profound happening in a way that there's a we mentioned the wild edge before. I think we become different in this in a way that um I think we can't then kind of claim any sort of arrival because the whole notion of arrival has fallen apart in in the unfolding of this.
Yes, I'm reminded of the Judy Toots song, "Stop Chasing Shadows, Just Enjoy the Ride." And there's something about you are taken on a ride, and there isn't a specific sort of set of rules for where this ride may go, and it's almost like you have to learn to manage the territory that you're in.
I was just going to say, I think there's something really helpful in seeing this almost geographically, that it is terrain or territory. And I think after a while, we can get more familiar with it as we could with any territory, any terrain, right? That we know what it is to be in the bog or the rapids or the nice sunny hills, whatever we're in the moment. And so I think there is something about you talked about resources earlier. I think there's something of capacity that builds over time, that we are more able to be with the sorrow or the rage or the terror or whatever it happens to be. And the unfolding, absolutely, it has no rules. It has no, I don't think we can really build some sort of ideological framework around it. The unfolding takes us where it takes us, and I think it is evolutionary. I think it's a natural evolutionary process that happens in this.
Yes. So, you came through something, so clearly you're functioning in a very different way in your life now. And you said you got a job, and almost feels like, wow, how were you able to get a job having been in the sort of the terrain of that? What did you have to do in order to be able to function back into the earth plane in that way?
Um, I think it was about taking it really slowly. I mean, I had the job that I referred to, I had for a couple of years as I came out of the dark night. That was working as a receptionist in a well-being and counseling clinic.
So
So
you were in a wholesome environment, presumably.
yeah, yeah, I was absolutely. And I think the ability to, as I said, the capacity grows. There's other things I think that begin to come in as we begin to come out of the intensity of
Yeah.
that terrain, that things become more normal for more of the time, I guess you could say. And I think there's something then about as we have more capacity, the intensity, the sort of amplitude of things comes down a bit because there's more space for what's coming in.
Yes.
And so again, I think it was just very, very small movements over time. And that's still going on now. I don't think this is about being then free of all of those things, as I was saying, and then being able to sort of go, da da da, I'm out in the world again. I think it's much more subtle than that.
Well, in some ways, it also feels like when we go on a journey of discovery in the way that you did and the way that I have also, that it's almost like we then have a sacred task to enable others. In some ways, we become way showers for others to go on a similar who are going on a similar journey, and that we've actually mapped some of the terrain. So presumably, the reason you wrote your book was in order to map the terrain and to make sense of the journey was like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that term wayfarers. I mean, I like the the Celtic phrase anam cara, a similar sort of idea. And I think I really wrote the book that I would have wanted to read when I was
Exactly.
most in it.
Yes, yes.
And I've always been a diary keeper, a journal keeper since I was really young. So part of what was natural to me in the dark night was to write as I was experiencing. And so I was able to use the original material, as it were, woven in with what I was writing in 2018. And I hear from people a lot saying, oh wow, that's so, thank you, because what you've described is what I'm experiencing, or I haven't heard somebody else describe it like this in other places. Or and I think there is something about, I mean, I'm sure this might be similar for you, but when I was deeply in it for those years, I would have had absolutely no idea that I could have ended up doing what I've done. I mean, that would have been so far out of my range of
Yes.
possibilities. And I think it's precisely that somehow means that we are then able to be wayfarers for other
Yeah.
people. Because I think if we'd stayed, I mean, I was working with people before my dark night began, and so I think, we if we hadn't lost that ability, I don't think we would have the ability to do what we do now, actually,
No,
because
that's
we
right.
wouldn't have the falling would not have been a falling as I understand it.
And so you are a therapist as well.
No, I'm not a therapist. I was originally a homeopath, and I am a philosopher. I did a philosophy master's a few years ago, and I work with what I loosely call somatic inquiry. So it's a kind of very, very loosely speaking inquiry that's deeply embodied and imaginal.
Mm. How has this affected your homeopathy practice, for example?
Oh,
Uh,
I mean, that was it stopped
yes.
on the first day of the Dark Night and never resumed.
Mm. And so where do you go from here? What does the journey look like going forwards? Or do you not know at this stage?
I think I think there's a degree of not knowing.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, the unfolding continues, and I think what that means, I guess, is there's the deeper and deeper seeing of internal structures, internal patterning, especially on a visceral, energetic, sort of structural level. So I'm not really talking about thinking or thought patterns or necessarily emotion particularly, but these deeper kind of tendencies. And I think it's important to say that what happens in the dark night, what we touch into, is not purely personal.
Yeah.
So there are the layers of the familial or the cultural that are coming in more and more over time. There's less and less, in a sense, about my personal history and my childhood, and more these deeper patterns. And because there's nothing exclusive in that. I might sit down today and a bunch of things come up about my childhood. I don't know.
Yes.
But I think as that happens simultaneously, there's more and more of a touching into what we were talking about before, this kind of love, or whatever it is that comes in. Sometimes I think of it as the space of unconditionality, which has a profound kindness in it. And it isn't that we're doing it isn't that we're doing it, it's that we're being touched by it, or moving into it, or whatever direction that goes exactly.
I guess that goes along with the surrender as well, isn't it? That we're becoming it as we let go into whatever's happening for us.
yes, exactly. And I think we can't, it's really difficult. I mean, there's no way of anticipating that,
No.
right? I mean, I'm sure we've both had loads of experiences where we've been really in the depths of deep, deep pain and then connected with something that 5 minutes before we had no idea about.
Yeah.
And I don't think that can happen when we're holding ourselves into something in some way. You know, I think if we sit down with some intention to, I don't know, whatever it is, I think that kind of impedes our ability to really go where we're being taken.
Yes. Yeah. So we're coming towards the end of our podcast, and the question I always ask at the end is what particular dragon have you had to slay? What's the particular obstacle you've had to overcome in order to be who you are right now?
Well, at the risk of, you know, going into something longer, for me, the whole notion of dragons and slaying has also fallen apart. So for me, there's something about, I guess for me, this is about becoming aware of what's here, of seeing what's here in a way that we haven't seen before. So the first step in that, I think, is simply the noticing, the seeing that there is something here of whatever description,
Yes.
and then a kind of a natural naming or identifying process of that, where it's almost like it lets us know what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
And then a being with it such that we start to come into relationship with it in some way. So for me, so it's difficult to answer the question because I struggle with the notion of, like I say, slaying or dragons. But I think for me the biggest thing in this is um I guess there is something in this about having the grit, and I don't know if this is a choice or not. I mean, I suspect it's probably not. But something in us builds that does have some kind of resolve and some, I think, a deep willingness builds to say yes to being with what's here.
Mm.
And I don't think that needs to be 100%. I mean, we're absolutely not talking about all of the time.
No,
And
no.
often what we're here with is our own willingness to be here, or to we might, what we're willing to be with might be our avoidance or our
Yeah.
distraction, or but I think there is something in that, in terms of coming through and then being a kind of commitment to the unfolding, that sense of, yeah, wherever it takes me, however raw, however painful, however deep this goes, yes. and and it is something that, a couple of weeks ago I had a profound experience of being so grateful that the dark night of the soul happened to me.
Yeah, that's lovely. So in some ways, it sounds like it's almost like a drug experience. Of course, it's not a drug experience, but people often want to experience something much bigger than themselves, and will find ways of doing that. Or life wants you to experience something much bigger than yourself, and it's found ways of using you as a vessel for that to happen as well.
Yeah, I think the latter definitely resonates. This idea that we're also being called in this. We're going down and in, but there is something of a calling happening, that life wants us to come out of whatever it's been in, and experience this in some way. And of course, when we're deeply in it, we're absolutely not grateful for it, and it
No, that's
feels
right.
like a calamity.
Yeah. So effectively, we're agents of evolution, I think, at some level as well. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's lovely.
I'll go with that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Fiona. It's been really, really lovely talking to you and enjoyable. unraveling of this very big subject as well. So I appreciate
Thanks.
you coming through this.
Thank you, Malcolm. A real pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.